Good morning. Well, we're in the middle of a story of Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore's life so that we can better understand the profound ideas which really started the Unity movement, which has inspired so many millions of people. And we're hoping that you people who are new to Unity will understand this well enough to become members in September, and it's a good review for everybody else. We've already seen how his childhood was one of poverty, a lack of formal education, a terrible accident that left him lame, and abandonment by his father. Yet he managed to get a classical education on the par with Harvard, and he succeeded financially in learning some of the most physically demanding trades possible, despite his physical handicap. To continue from Ruth Miller's book, The Power of Unity, The Amazing Discoveries of Charles Fillmore, and I quote, "Then the time came when Charles felt that he had learned all that he could in Minnesota. He was barely earning enough at that time to support his mother and him, and there was just no room for advancement with the businesses in town. More importantly, his study partner had gone on to join the military, so Charles had no one to explore new ideas with, and he decided to just move on. While Charles was growing up, the railroad was being built across North America, and the word went out, 'Go west, young man.' So in 1874, drawn by tales of the booming West, 20-year-old Charles left Minnesota to make his way in the world. He boarded the train and left his mother in St. Cloud with a promise to send her his wages and to bring her to live with him as soon as he could afford to do so. He found his way to Denison, Texas, and took a job at the local railroad station, counting the freight as it was loaded and unloaded, and again learning all he could about that business as well as the job. He learned so well that when his supervisor took ill, Charles was the only one that knew enough to take over, and so he was soon promoted from freight counter to cashier. His job was to sell people their tickets and take the payments for shipping the packages and larger shipments that went through his station. He had learned how to do most of this kind of work on his jobs in St. Cloud. So once he had a system figured out, it was easy to work and left him with time to explore and to learn. Charles sent for his mother, as promised, and the two of them shared a home once again. Charles was a young man. He had a very inquiring mind. Like most young men of the day, he had spent a fair amount of time at the local tavern, acquiring a taste for whiskey and beer. Unlike most of them, though, he really appreciated a good book and a lively discussion about ideas. So Charles was drawn to attend lectures and public meetings. Some of these were what they called book groups, which were called then literary societies, sort of like the Salon in Paris, where people would meet, read essays, passages of novels and poetry aloud, and discuss their meaning and impact on their lives and their thinking. Another form of entertainment that was beginning to be popular in the years Charles was growing up was the tent meeting. Many of these were revival meetings in which preachers who traveled from town to town would use all kinds of methods to revive people's faith in Christ and to give up their sinful ways. Some of these tent meetings focused on specific issues like giving up alcohol. They were called temperance meetings and were often led by women. I have a feeling that you all in New Orleans might not know much about temperance meetings, but Charles Fillmore had a lot of exposure to them. All of these meetings included testimonials and readings by people in the crowd. It was at such a meeting that Charles made a discovery that would set the course of his life. The discovery, was about 26 when he was barely 20. But he knew the moment he heard her voice that the lovely redhead would be his wife. In fact, he heard a small voice inside saying, "Charles, this is your wife." She was reading poetry aloud, and something in her voice and in her understanding of what she read connected with his own inquiring mind. She had spirit as well as intellect, and was so lovely that she took his breath away. Her name was Mary Caroline, but everyone called her Myrtle. She was a teacher working part-time at a school in Texas as she tried to heal a respiratory problem she'd been told she'd inherited and would ultimately kill her. Tuberculosis, which there was no cure for at that time. Like the woman who had tutored Charles in Minnesota, she had graduated from the literary course at Oberlin College in Ohio and was familiar with many of the books that Charles had read back home. Myrtle was raised in Pagetown, Ohio, a small country town that her father had founded on farmland at an intersection. Always a frail child, she loved to read, spent hours sitting by a little stream, communing with God. From her earliest days as a teacher, Myrtle was loved for her sweet disposition, respect, and appreciation for her students, and love of learning. Charles was in love for life. He made it a point to participate in every group event she attended. Fossil hunts, river excursions, bird watching hikes. Even though his injured leg made every step an effort, it was worth it to be with her and to explore the many ideas and possibilities that they shared in common. Then in 1878, she returned to Missouri and resumed her teaching career. Charles was sad, but saw it as an opportunity to work hard and earn some money to maybe create a home for her. He started writing letters to Myrtle, which happily she responded to, and they continued to share many dreams and ideas through the mail. Soon after Myrtle left, Charles took his savings from the Texas job, hired out as a mule team driver, and made his way across the Rocky Mountains to the silver mining boom in Colorado, hoping to earn enough money to maybe be able to support Myrtle. In spite of being a medium-build man and lame, Charles handled the mules well. The days were long and hot, and the nights were cold. Charles would hang tarps around the wagon frame, keeping the warmth in so that he could sleep under it. Riding in the seat of the wagon, he managed those mules up and down the narrow trails and steep sides of the mountain passes. Only once did he lose his team on one of those long, steep descents where the mules got going so fast that they couldn't make the curve. Then he, like many drivers before, leapt off the wagon just before it went over the edge. Mules and all. I don't like that part of it. In the face of such constant danger, Charles decided that if he was going to live a full life, he'd better try something different. Drawing on his love of science that he had gained from his studies with his neighbor, he went to a local school, and he learned enough about weighing the ore the miners brought in to be able to tell them exactly how much gold was in each piece. He built a partnership with another man, rented space in a barn-like building made of loosely attached boards, and the two did very well together. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, Charles wrote frequent long letters to Myrtle, continuing the kinds of conversations they had had in Texas. He wrote about the natural world all around him, about the miners and all of their activities, and he shared his thoughts about the nature of the world and God. She replied in kind, and his love for her remained strong. Finally, after almost 2 years, he believed he had established himself well enough to support a wife. To be continued. Have to come back next week. As you can see, Charles's childhood adversities helped build his character, his strength, and his perseverance. Despite his physical disability, he conquered the material plane, and he even tackled physical challenges like being a mule team driver, even when the dangers involved having to jump to safety when the runaway mule teams couldn't make the steep curves on those high mountains. He didn't give in to his emotions. He could have let himself get very depressed and hopeless when Myrtle, the love of his life, had to move away from him. Instead, he pursued her and wrote to her and worked for several years to earn enough to provide a home for her in the hope of making her his wife. And he did not give in to his intellect, his keen intellect. He didn't let his intellect prevent him from gaining spiritual wisdom. He benefited from the fundamentalist Bible tent meetings and anti-alcohol temperance gatherings. He didn't close his mind to anything, and he took whatever made sense. In the language of another New Thought great, Emmett Fox, Fillmore was gaining mastery over his horses. Though I guess this might well have been literally his mules that he led over the steep mountains. And for you newcomers, that brings us to another aspect of the unity teachings, the metaphysical interpretation of the Bible. Emmett Fox, who is quoted in Unity Village ministerial classes, gives a wonderful metaphysical interpretation of the 4 horses of the apocalypse from Revelations in the Bible. And I thought the symbolism was a good way to describe Charles Fillmore at this point. Really what we call metaphysical interpretations of the Bible in the 21st century is just an explanation of the literary style of the Bible and literature all over the world from the times when the Bible was written. These interpretations were well understood in art and literature up through the Middle Ages. But starting with the Renaissance, this more esoteric, psychological understanding of profound truths in story and art form was replaced with a more scientific approach to everything. Horses played a big part in people's daily lives for thousands of years, so it isn't unusual that horses would be used as relevant symbols. Plato used the idea of the horse and carriage to represent parts of our psyche. And more recently, Gurdjieff, who brought Eastern ideas to the West, used it. Gurdjieff said that we could think of a person as being comprised of 3 parts: a carriage, a team of horses, and a driver. The carriage is the body. We've got to keep it up or it won't roll along safely. If one of the wheels is broken, it won't go. The horses are our emotions, which must be controlled and all aimed in the same direction. And the driver is our intellect, who must direct and control the horses and make sure that the carriage is in good working order also. But we are not the carriage or the horses or the driver. We simply use them to get where we want to go. We are the owner of the whole outfit. We decide our destiny, and then we tell the driver where to go. We use the carriage, the horses, and the driver, our body, our emotions, and our intellect, to get to our destination. They are our servants, not our master. We should never let them control us. Similarly, according to Emmett Fox in Revelations in the Bible, we can use the imagery of the horses to understand different parts of us, of our psychology. He teaches that in Revelations, that the horses are of different colors, and that the different colors represent the physical, the emotional, and the intellectual, and the spiritual parts of life. There are 4 different horses, 4 different colors. For example, the pale horse symbolizes the physical body or the material plane. People who ride the pale horse are attached to things of the world. They are materialistic. They make gods of and worship such things as money, fame, worldly distinctions, and honor. The sense world is what attracts them, so they often devolve into such things as gluttony, drugs, alcohol, etc. Consequently, their bodies degenerate instead of regenerate, and their souls crumble from the loneliness of their egos standing apart from God and other people. The result is that they stand alone. Thus, they are not protected, and consequently, they face their death. Their faces are literally pale due to the terror of seeing their death, their living death, so to speak. Thus, the pale horse. Riders of the pale horse may be multimillionaires, famous rock stars, and other conquerors of materiality, but they can be dead inside because their money can't purchase friends, health, loyalty, love, or peace of mind. They are said in many books and films, like Clint Wood's Pale Horse, Pale Rider, to ride a pale horse, the horse of death, inner death. Hang on, this isn't a Baptist revival meeting here. We're talking about Unity says that symbolically, all men who do not live in Christ's consciousness may be considered dead. They for a season walk in what is called living bodies, but they are not truly alive. They are empty of real life. It is, however, possible for man to make himself as truly alive as Jesus Christ, and that is the problem set before each and every one of us. It's very important that we begin at once to make this life eternal choice, right now, right here, life. And with this state of consciousness, we are enlivened. We become alive. We have that spark of life that invigorates us and gives us life eternal here on earth right now. Charles Fillmore, in the early years of his life, learned to maneuver well through the physical plane of life without letting worldly desires dominate him. He didn't let the material plane consume him. He was always drawn toward higher values and higher interests. Just look at the lofty and spiritual mind of his love Myrtle, to whom he was drawn. Charles learned early not to ride on the biblical pale horse. Another of the 4 horses of the Apocalypse and Revelations is the red horse. Red is the color of emotions, especially anger. The red horse often symbolizes war because that's what anger causes. When we let our emotions run away with us, when we get angry over trifles like traffic or what we see on the news, we are riding the red horse of Revelations. When we let others anger us, when they say or do something that our programming says is offensive, we are riding the red horse. When we get depressed because the outside world doesn't conform to what our conditioning tells us must be the case in order for us to be happy, we are also riding the red horse. Not riding the red horse doesn't mean we don't have emotions, of course. It simply means that we don't let our emotions rule us. We are in charge, like we are aiming the horses all in the right direction, like the owner who directs the driver in Gurdjieff's allegory. Charles Fillmore certainly could have ridden the red horse by getting hopelessly depressed because he was crippled, because he loved Myrtle, the love of his life. She moved away, and he had nothing material to offer her in marriage to set up a household. He could have gotten very depressed about that. I probably would have. But he methodically went for what he wanted, visualized success, and did what he needed to do and to have something to offer her. Imagine, he was still in his 20s, and he had that much control over himself and his emotions. Fillmore didn't let his emotions rule him. He did not ride the red horse. And then there's, anybody remember what other color horses there are? Good, the black horse, the intellect. If we just use the mind to gain wisdom, we'll be left empty, hungry. The intellect is limited to a certain point. To avoid riding the black horse doesn't mean not to have a good intellect. Fillmore certainly had a sharp mind, was very well educated. To ride the black horse means you let your intellect dominate you. Like the driver in Gurdjieff's metaphor, the mind shouldn't be told what to do, but the mind should be told what to do by the owner, you. The mind is to be used where appropriate. It is not to be your master. The intellect can be very helpful, and Emmett Fox says that many religious people would do well to develop their intellect more keenly. However, the mind can only deal with three-dimensional things. Beyond that, the intellect breaks down in its effectiveness. Thus, people who ride the black horse are said to starve. They can't get the sustenance they need. Since the intellect can't describe the higher dimensions, the spiritual dimensions, people who rely exclusively on it miss out on the biggest part of reality. Thus, they inhibit their spiritual understanding and growth and are stuck on the physical plane. They are literally starving for the real meaning of life. Relying on the intellect to understand higher matters like wisdom is like using the cell phone to put on your lipstick, which I tried to do this week, or a car to cross the ocean. Cell phones in cars are great tools, but they can't be used as mirrors and boats. The great philosopher Spinoza said, to define God is to deny him. The intellect just can't wrap itself around something that is that much bigger than itself. Fillmore did not allow his keen intellect to ruin his spiritual quest. He was a seeker, but despite his classical personal studies, he didn't totally ascribe to the post-Middle Ages Western approach to spiritual matters, which, since the Renaissance, has not kept the intellect in its place. Education since then has said essentially that if you can't touch it and feel it and measure it, it doesn't exist. Fortunately, modern science, very modern science, and such things as microwaves, cell phones, and TV waves, and quantum physics is proving that the old, strictly intellectual approach to understanding the world is wrong, that things we can't see do exist. Fillmore amazingly ascribed to that approach in the late 19th century. That's one reason he appreciated Myrtle Fillmore's poetry so much. That's why he later did things like meet with the great Christian scholar and Hindu mystic Yogananda. Fillmore did not ride the black horse. He did not let his intellect prevent him from seeing the invisible realms of life. Unity teaches that the book of Revelations is not about some future Armageddon. It's about our personal, daily, existential Armageddon, our personal inner battle between the forces of life and darkness. Each time we deny mounting the pale, red, or black horse, each time that we don't let our physical, emotional, or mental desires run our lives, we are said to be riding which horse? The white horse of wisdom, spirituality, and power, which produces our freedom through God realization. Thus, the theme of the book of Revelations is the redemption and the ascension of man from the natural to the divine plane of existence. When we are born again into the beings that we can and were meant to be, loving, joyful, peaceful, and bountiful. Stay tuned, and we will see more how Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore evolved to the point of riding the white horse in Revelations, and how he taught us too to be white horse equestrians, and thus find a miraculous way of living, creating heaven on earth for ourselves and all those around us, as it was taught originally 2,000 years ago. Amen.